Hi, David.
Russell, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Well, I'm glad that you accepted my invitation to sort of be interviewed for this topic, which I think in the end of the day is what are good practice ideas for firms to stay independent? We've got all this M&A going on, and I do want to talk about that, and I do want to set the stage on that. Um, but so many firms say, look, we that's not really our first choice. How do we stay competitive? What do we need to do to be independent? And I know you counsel um, clients a lot on that through your boot camp and otherwise, and I want you to talk about that. But um, I thought we could just sort of talk about your advice, your experience, your techniques, what you think's important for firms to you know thrive, make a lot of money, be well run, be competitive, okay, and have enough money for the partners who want to retire so that they don't want to go the private equity route, or they don't feel like they have to go the private equity route in order to secure the retirement benefits that they want to get, or maybe even a little extra, because in the market right now firms are getting a premium from his historical amounts. And so um, that's really what this is about. I'm Russell Shapiro. I'm a partner at Levenfeld Pearlstein. David, you might want to introduce yourself, Grinding River, and everything you do. I'm just an M&A lawyer that gets into this stuff, and you and I have crossed paths many times. And
Far
I know
from
you have a
a
whole
lawyer,
world
Russell.
of all your practice management guidance that you give people, and so give me a just give me a little bit of that, and then we'll
Yeah,
get started on these questions.
sounds good, Russell. And I'm enjoying this conversation. When you first asked about how could we do something together, you're like, let's write an article. And knowing me now, my immediate reaction is we got to do video, right? Let's take it digital. Let's get on video and have some fun doing it along the way. So, as you mentioned, David Toth, Chief Growth Officer at Winding River Consulting. I had the fortunate opportunity to join Gary Shamus, my mentor, about 4.5 years ago at Winding River, where he took his 30 years of industry experience and applied it to help the rest of the profession kind of grow and scale after he exited his firm in 2014. So today, Winding River does three things: leadership development, consulting, and advisory in digital. I'd say primarily we do work with mostly in the top 400 firms, but our signature program is Managing Partner Bootcamp, or MPB Leadership Accelerated. We've got a community of over 130 leaders. And so having these conversations, getting together, 2, 3, 4 times a year, really helps us keep what's top of mind for a lot of these firms. And I think one thing I've learned from Gary over the course of time, especially as he grew his firm and exited it to BDO, is when you take that initial vote on, are you selling to M&A, are you going private equity, have you actually talked about staying independent and made a vote whether or not that's what you do or don't want to do? And I think in a lot of cases, that's one of the conversations that gets skipped in terms of the strategic planning process for a firm. And so we've really tried to emphasize around saying, hey, we've got some ideas, concerns. We're not sure where to go, what to do. There's so many opportunities and challenges at the same time. Do we want to stay independent? Do we have what it takes? And if so, now let's figure it out. If not, then we have to evaluate our options. So excited to dive a little bit more deeper into this today, Russell. I know we get to see two different lenses of kind of the profession as it relates to how these conversations can evolve and sometimes move very fruitful in the right direction, and at other times, sometimes we run into some roadblocks and hurdles.
All right. Well, let me just warm you up a little bit,
Yeah,
okay? And then get into it a little bit more. How do you think firms are doing this year in general?
I'd say a couple different things really stand out as part of that. I think one is they're still, flush with opportunities. Something to keep in mind is, as we've seen since 2021, a lot of activity in M&A or PE, especially in that top 50. A lot of mid-market firms have this opportunity to go upstream. There's a lot of markets, left open, if you will, for a mid-sized firm to take advantage of from a client perspective. So opportunities are incredibly flush. And as you start thinking about getting rid of some of those tier C, tier D clients, you also don't have a lot of options on where that can necessarily go. And so we're really starting to think about this whole, transactional type of model. Talent is top of mind. Yesterday, I was at a BDO Alliance regional event, and the executive director, somebody at the Ohio CPA Society, talked that 66% of accountants, of CPAs in the state of Ohio, are over the age of 50. Wall Street Journal isn't doing the profession any justice either necessarily. Looking at over the last 2 years, 300,000 people leaving the profession with more than 6 years of experience. And so talent is still top of mind. We know there's pipeline issues. We know salaries are a challenge, the 150 credit hour, and firms are really trying to figure out how are they going to grow and scale when there's this kind of challenge happening within the talent pool and the pipeline itself. Um, One of the top things we're hearing is corporate governance and infrastructure. We've gotten to 60 million, 40 million, 80 million, and we've just done it, a traditional partnership model, and we don't have that infrastructure in place to necessarily continue to do that. So I see a lot of firms prioritizing that right now. And then the last thing I'll say, Russell, is technology. And I know we might touch on this a little bit more, but the necessity to be ready to adopt tools like artificial intelligence, to have the right tech stack in place for growth, for data management, for workflows and optimization, and making sure that we're dedicating resources to be innovative and understand how our vendors are going to be helping us just as much as we need to ourselves.
Well, you actually touched on a lot of the sort of the warm-up questions I had on the talent war, where things stand there, and on, sort of will technology help? Okay. I mean, a lot of firms are trying to implement technology to help, one, get them better, produce better work products, but two, cut down on some of the mundane tasks. A lot of firms are also going to India to get help. I mean,
Yep.
it's used to be just the big firms doing that. Now it's really gotten to smaller firms
Yeah.
who are, outsourcing some of their work to help with the talent shortage, to help with costs. Um, it's clearly happening and an emphasis of a lot of firms. Um, let me ask you, how you'd characterize the current M&A environment.
It's a great question. I saw, there was a couple, acquisitions this week that occurred, over the course of this year. There's been some, big kind of, M&A activity. You're seeing some of these private equity backed firms now really get a little bit more aggressive. It's not as active as it was. I think it's starting to pick up again. I think the reality is a lot of firms are trying to figure out what are they going to be doing, right? We've been very tactful since the pandemic, now starting to really think about what it's going to take going forward. And so firms that are hungry or are looking to acquire right now, their appetite hasn't changed. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what is the right, fit, if you will, that makes sense. So we're seeing activity pick up. It did slow down over the summer, but there's no question that it's far from over. And really, what is happening is this, again, consolidation. If you look at these top 10, top 15 firms that are just constantly going up in revenue, it's
Yeah.
leaving a gap in the middle market. So these mid-tier firms are trying to say, okay, 45, 50 million, how do we get to 75? Add more staff, add more capacity, add more talent. And a big part of that's advisory, right? If you have this plan, to grow, can we find a match that's going to help us on that front? And so I think there's a lot of activity, but I know you get to see it just as well as I do, maybe from a slightly different lens, and love to get your take on it.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I mean, I've been doing accounting from M&A for probably 15 plus years, and I had a good amount of work, and we were doing what I call traditional deals. A firm merges into another firm, sort of partners move into their retirement system. Um, Sometimes there was some cash involved, a lot of times not, depending on the age of the partners and so forth. And then private equity came in a little over 2 years ago now, and um, has really, it changed the model both in terms of, the terms of the transaction, i.e., cash up front, um, rollover equity, and so forth, but also changed the valuation. I mean, the valuations have come up, considerably. I don't know, I'd say 30, 40% what they used to be, at least for well-run firms, okay, that have a bench beneath the older generation, because that's a lot of buyers want, you know, because of the talent war that you just talked about, firms that have that bench, okay, underneath the 60-year-old level, or not, maybe even under the 50-year-old level, those firms are a lot more valuable to acquirers, whether they're traditional acquirers or private equity-backed acquirers. So the activity was tremendous the last 2 years, and a lot of big firms, meaningfully sized firms, went the private equity route. Um, I think that a lot of firms that were wanted to be out of the gate doing that have done that.
Yeah.
Um, Seeing more what I'll call add-ons or smaller add-ons now, instead of the 50 or $100 million firm, we're seeing the 10 and $20 million firms saying, okay, this might work for me. They be an add-on. Multiples a little bit less than the platform or the really big firms, but it's still good. It's still a solution. Many of their minds it's a better solution than staying independent because they don't feel like they can run it in the long term, or the next generation could run it. And that's something that you're going to start talking about in a few minutes. Um, um, so a lot of more activity seeming like in a little bit of smaller firms than it was maybe 6 months ago. I think there's a number of firms, both big and small, sort of holding back, saying, is
Yeah.
this private? One, do I want to stay independent? And some firms have made the decision they want to stay independent. That's their mantra. Others are like, well, let's sort of go on both tracks. We're going to stay independent for now. We're going to see how we could run our firm, okay? And we're going to keep an eye on how this private equity thing is going to turn out, okay?
Right.
All the while, there's still a lot of traditional deals. There's still a lot of firms. I'd say half of the deals I see are still traditional deals. Okay, meaning not merging into private equity sponsored firms, but just moving into the traditional firm, joining them as partners, going to the retirement model, and wanting a partnership model. So both dynamics are going on, and
Well, I
I
think there's
think.
a third dynamic to even mention too, and look at what Wayne Burson did at BDO with the ESOP, and
Hmm.
trying to create yet another lever, if you will, when it comes to we've got a lot of people retiring coming up. We've got
Hmm.
to keep this profession interesting for younger professionals, right? And
Hmm.
younger generations, because that whole funded chain letter concept, the whole idea that I've got to be vested over 30 years is making it a lot more difficult to keep that there. So I think just as much as some of the things you detailed out, this is also, now another element to the mix that didn't exist. But I do think that PE is absolutely challenging us to value our businesses a lot higher than they ever have been before, and realize that we have enterprise value in some of what we've established or created. I do get to
It's
talk
true.
to some firms, and they say they want to be independent, but do they really have the things in place in order to do that? And I hear, as you start hearing that from firms and you start peeling back some of those layers and realize, hey, we don't have all these boxes checked, then all of a sudden they start pivoting to say, well, maybe we do need to look at, some of these other options. Is it, a merger between, two independent firms that are looking to, add more value? Is it, because we have compensation issues, or concerned about the balance sheet going forward? So the other thing that's interesting, and you hit on this for a second, is the first year or two with PE, it was big firms, right? I mean, like you said, the big deals. Now, firms of all sizes are getting offers, and you have the roll-up concept, like with a Cherry Beckert or an Eisner or a Citron, and then you have firms like Ascend that are going after that below $20 million,
It's true.
market to build that platform. They've got 6 firms now, 5 or 6 firms, all in the last 12 months, that get to keep their brand in the marketplace, but also feel that they have the confidence of strong strategy, growth, leadership to help them move forward and accomplish some of the challenges they have to face with technology and talent, and some of those things.
You're 100% right, and I've talked to two or three other firms, PE firms, that want to sort of mimic the Ascend model, and it's getting really competitive for
Yeah,
the $5 million firm right now. I just have to say one thing. You kind of gave me an advertisement opportunity a minute ago. So I think in about 2 or 3 weeks, I'm interviewing Steve Ferrara
yeah.
from BDO to talk to him about the ESOP and why they did it and how they think it helps. And so this could be an avenue for other firms. And I'm interviewing Steve for that purpose in about 2 weeks, 2 or 3
Exciting.
weeks, or something
I'll
like
be
that.
tuning in.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I wanted to key off of something you said earlier, and I actually wasn't sure where you came down on this, so let me just ask you to clarify. So PE argues that the deferred compensation model that people wait until they're 65 to sort of get a payout, work their whole life, wait till 65, hope the next generation's there to buy out their clients essentially, doesn't work anymore. Okay. And that's one of the reasons PE is coming in, gets people money, gives them multiple bites at the apple over time. And I wasn't sure if you agree with that assessment from PE or you don't agree with that assessment.
Whether it's not a private equity firm, there is no question that Gen Z and millennials are going to have a much more difficult time committing to something for 30 years in invested mindset. So I do agree that not only because of that commitment that's required and dedication to stay in one place for that period of time, which is a big shift in generations, I also think it's equally as much about the lack of talent that's coming into the profession that's requiring the model to become more transactional. And so I think both of those two pressures, can kind of play towards that whole deferred comp conversation or concern. And that's why you're also seeing some of these partnership models go to more of that corporate governance or business type of corporation model.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that then. I want to now sort of go full into how do you stay independent? How do you work with firms to stay independent? What are the key things that firms need to stay independent? What are the variables about a firm that may, you know, go toward staying independent or not staying independent? So you touched on a couple of those, like uh, what kind of management style, okay? Um, to me, I wrote down some other things to think about, like age dispersion, okay, leadership development, technology investments, profitability, consulting offerings, um, maybe it's practice areas, maybe ability to recruit. I mean, all these things seem to me to play into um, whether a firm could sort of deliver the necessary profits to its partners such that they want to stay independent. Okay.
Yep.
Um, but some accountants just want to be independent. They don't even care if they make as much. They don't want to be told what to do. That's a whole nother conversation potentially. Um, but so I'm just trying to say, okay, like in your, you got a firm that comes to you and says, David, we want to do this on our own. Okay. Um, how do you how do you assess it whether
Yeah.
they'll be successful starting number one, and number two is if you think they have the possibility to be successful, okay, what do you tell them that they've got to do?
Yeah. It's a great question. So, in a lot of cases, we try to leverage a partner retreat to start these conversations a little bit deeper, right? Really peel back and understand, yes, we say we want to stay independent, but do we understand what that entails? So, meeting with the executive committee, meeting with the partner group, coming together, and then really assessing, do we have what it takes? So, working with Gary, developing kind of a presentation and a format, we've identified 10 different areas that we take a look at when it comes to staying independent and realizing where do we need to invest, especially in the perspective of a modern accounting firm. And so the first three things that we're going to look at and talk about with the firms is number one, partnership alignment. Okay. In a lot of cases, we can't move the firm forward if we're not aligned. We worked with a firm recently. For 3 years, they were going through a transition of leadership. Okay. They couldn't execute that transition because they didn't have alignment amongst all of the partners, which caused them to slow down significantly in their ability to execute the strategy that they agreed to during that transition. So we had one of those boxes not checked. So then we said, okay, let's go to the next one. The next box is succession plan. Do we have the right people coming up that we've been investing into to ensure that we are confident this firm can grow independently going forward? To know that our deferred comp, our retirement can be funded, and that's a big element of confidence. And sometimes when you start having this conversation, if you haven't talked about succession, you're 3 to 5 years behind. You're already behind the eight ball. And so knowing that succession has to be part of that. If you don't have strong confidence in future leaders for your firm, that's another box that's going to stop the conversation around staying independent really quickly. The third box that we evaluate is leadership. Do we have strong leadership in place? One of the things that we really look at, especially if you get over 20, 25 million in revenue, is your managing partner able to execute? Are they billing? How much of their time is billing? Are they committed to growing the firm or growing their clients, or both? And part of that comes back to corporate governance. Part of that comes back to having the ability to disenfranchise your partners, having the ability to execute on the strategy that's in place. So we look at those three elements. Some firms check all three boxes, and now we're focused on the next seven. Others haven't, and that's where we have to focus our time and
So just to recap, alignment, succession, and leadership.
You got it. So those are the three things where we feel that we have to evaluate in order to continue having the conversation around staying independent as a modern firm today. So if we get over that, right, now here's the next seven things. And you mentioned some of those. And we can talk about any of these in greater detail and kind of understand what they mean. Financial performance. You talked about, are we doing enough to be able to make what partners want to make to keep them engaged, hungry, and wanting to grow? Do we have a modern growth strategy? AI, ChatGPT, digital, right? We are now in a digital human environment, a yes and not an either or. It's not done just digitally or just face to face. It has to be both going forward. Do we have confidence in our ability to do that? If we're making the money that we want, are we reinvesting into the firm, right? Do we have the appetite to reinvest into the firm, into technology, into attention retraction, to new capacity opportunities? Maybe that's optimization process. Maybe that's offshoring or onshoring or looking at other types of models. Some of the other things that come up, shift to advisory. What other services are we taking advantage of to keep more of a stickiness factor? ESG is a great example, cybersecurity, wealth management. If we're not doing these things, our competitors are starting to offer them, and we have to be able to remain competitive in that type of landscape. So, those are a few things that jump off top of mind, but curious on your end, Russell, are there any things that really come front and center for you when it comes to, what it takes to remain independent, and maybe some of the conversations you're having or seeing?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a couple of things from my perspective that I see. One is that there's sort of the positive reasons to merge and the negative reasons. So some of the firms say, look, it's going to take me forever to build up the talent I need to capitalize on the opportunities I have.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to say that's really a minority of firms. That's the positive reason to merge. Look, our business is exploding. I'm getting all these opportunities. It'll take me years to build the expertise. I need to move into an environment where I'll have expertise. There aren't a lot of firms that are merging just for that reason. There are some. For some, it's a component. Um, most of the firms, a lot of the firms I see merging are doing it. I'll call it for a negative reason. I don't maybe shouldn't be characterizing as positive, but they don't feel like they have the succession. They don't have the confidence in the next generation. They're getting out of a problem. Okay, maybe their partners aren't getting along. Maybe they can't. Maybe it's like the the partners are running the firm rather than the firm running the partners, and that's leading to
Or leadership. Yeah.
profit challenges. Um, I would say look. It's in many firms it's a combination of all of the above. Okay. Um, so, I mean, those are the main things I see. Some firms, just can't seem to recruit, and that's a reason. Um, that's what I would say. It's some firms are they don't think they can make the technology investment or make
That's
the
a big one right
technology
now.
leap, right? And say, look,
Yeah,
we're just it's harder for us to do on our own. Okay, that's neither a positive nor negative reason, I guess, is the way I'm characterizing it. So look,
yeah,
it's hard on your own. We're a $25 million firm. We're trying to get better business. We're trying to recruit. We need more expertise. We need more technology. Maybe we need more structure. And so it's time to merge. And so look at I think that staying independent is like for my firm, like I wanted to be independent. We have about, we have a pretty big, no, we have about 100 lawyer firm, okay?
yeah.
And we built it, and I've been there since the beginning from 26 lawyers. And it's hard. It's really hard. And and you know, but it's great if you have the right group of people you're with. And if you're not with the right group of people and you're not having fun doing it, okay, then it's not the right thing to do. So you got to kind of like you have to have like a mindset of, look, we're gonna do this on our own. We want to be together. We
Yep.
want to make this work. We want to be competitive. We don't want to be managed by others. Okay. But, that's really hard. And a lot of firms will go through a cycle. Like they'll have an entrepreneur, either a founding generation or a next generation that's entrepreneurial and says, hey, I'm going to do this on my own and make just as much money. Won't give any money to the private equity firms. And I think I could do everything they could do. Maybe true, maybe not. Okay. Um, and we can do this. Okay. But then the next generation comes and like they don't have the determination or the
Appetite,
fire or
right?
appetite or whatever, or the just the drive to do it. Okay, and they say, well, then the firm says, well, maybe it is better to get uh, you know merge up where it might be more professionally managed, there might be more investment dollars available, more expertise. Um, So, a firm on day one could be one thing, and on day 20 could be another, and then sometimes in those firms that have like second or third generation that's not as entrepreneurial, um, they may, somebody may come, some partner may come up and say, hey, I want to lead this. I'm going to turn this around and we'll still stay independent. So, it's, I don't know where I'm going with this, David. I feel like I'm
Well, the
rambling,
one
but
thing that
it,
I'm
there,
getting from what you're saying
yeah.
is culture. You have to have a strong culture in place within your firm to understand the pros, the negatives, the middle in between. Do we have a culture that's willing to grow, that everybody is excited about growing, wants to remain independent? And I think firms that are doing that are really thinking about and being intentional with culture. What's our growth culture look like? Are we people first? How are we dealing with work life balance and hybrid versus remote? There's not one firm, and I don't know how you guys handle this, that have figured out this work environment. I talk to firm leaders over the age of 50 that get so stressed out about trying to teach and educate and train younger professionals today in a hybrid environment. We have to be back in the office to do that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but this all boils back to culture. And that's why Winning Ways this year is so much focused, on the culture piece. But that's a lot of what I hear from you is, you guys, your firm, you have a strong culture that's been built up since you've grown over time. And I think firms haven't necessarily invested into that as much.
Well, culture is critical. I once heard this professor saying, he said something to me that I really resonated. He said, what did he say? He says, basically, your firm is a conversation. Okay, that's all it is. What is the conversation you're having? Okay, professional service firms are all about motivating people.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I love that phrase. Your firm is essentially a conversation.
Yeah.
So, um, listen, I'll give you my opinion on hybrid. I'm no expert, but it's here to stay. Okay. So clear in my mind, clearly hybrid is the best solution. I don't think remote work is the best solution. Not that some people might be able to be remote, but by and large, that's not enough human interaction. Going back to the office 5 days a week just isn't happening. You can forget about it.
Yeah,
Okay, whether that's better than 2 or 3 days a week, I don't know. Okay, I personally, I'm home right now. I like it.
yeah,
Okay, I like being at home 2 or 3 days a week. I like being in the office 2 or 3 days a week. Okay, I don't think personally you need to be 5 days a week to train. I
yeah,
think you need to be 2 or 3 days a week, and I think you got to use your virtual tools. Okay, but I don't think you need five. And even it wouldn't even matter what I thought. Okay, it's 5 days. It's over
yeah,
for the next, at least the next generation.
yep. Yeah, one thing that does come up that I know a lot of firms ended up in hybrid, and I know you guys do this, is making sure that you have certain days where everybody on your team
Right,
is in the
right.
office,
You have to
right?
be deliberate
That's
about it. Right,
and intentional and deliberate. I think that's
right,
exactly a big piece of it. But I think culture is a huge underlining component to this. I know Peter Drucker once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
right, right,
And you see some of these firms, especially larger ones that go through M&A, that don't assess culture necessarily up front or go into this conversation of staying independent. And then part of the reason why firms have alignment issues is they have gone down that path and there's not a good culture fit between the organizations that are looking to merge in necessarily, right? I think that's where PE puts a lot of effort, like in an Ascend model, where they do focus on giving you those tools and toolkit of expertise and how to infuse that into a firm that may not be as confident in those areas. But there's no question between strategy and the ability to execute, capacity, advisory, right? Really being able to go deeper into relationships with your clients. AI, for example, I think CPA firms are incredibly well set up to be able to consult with their clients on artificial intelligence. We just have to have the confidence and resources to be able to bring that type of service to our clients. Because we're going to be, so close to it. ESG, that's something that I can see consulting firms taking advantage of if CPA firms don't, look at it from that perspective. Financial performance. Every year, the last 3 years, I know tons of firms increasing their rates by 5, 10, 12% and not seeing necessarily a negative feedback. I know a few firms that went overboard this past year, and they're feeling it a little bit. But the reality is supply and demand in the marketplace right now. You look at these young firms, young entrepreneurial firms that are starting to build from scratch. Their fifth or sixth or 10th or 15th hire is ahead of technology or ahead of development, because that's how we're looking to grow going forward. And so I think we both agree that, independency is a conversation we need to have. If there's one thing that I would say, hey, if this is top of mind for our firm right now, make sure your partner group has that conversation and votes on it. Do we want to stay independent? Are all the partners aligned with that? Now let's figure out what it's going to take. And if we feel like we want to stay independent, but I have some gaps, let's address that conversation before jumping the gun and going directly to a firm to merge up, before talking to private equity, before looking at other opportunities, and exiting, because I don't think that's part of the conversation we necessarily have. And now that there's a lot more tools around you to say, hey, here's what it takes to be able to accomplish that going forward.
makes sense.
So Russell, I think we've covered a lot of great content.
Yeah,
This has been exciting. I can't wait to hear you and Steve in a couple weeks talk about that ESOP model. And maybe towards the beginning of next year, let's regroup and see how 2023 ended up.
a great idea, David. Thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I
I've
enjoyed
enjoyed it.
it.
All right, I'm going to hit stop and just stay there.